Welcome to this rapid revision video looking at the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, 1979. Firstly, a bit of background. By 1979, the period of improved relations between the superpowers known as détente was coming to an end. If you want to know more about this period, check out the video before this one in the playlist. The reasons for Soviet interest in Afghanistan are both political and geographical, as can be seen in this map. Afghanistan is shown highlighted in yellow. To its north is the USSR, to its west, Iran, and to the south, Pakistan. There had been an Islamic revolution in Iran in 1979. Afghanistan was seen as an important neighbour of the USSR, but also as a buffer with revolutionary Iran. The Soviet Union wanted to stop the spread of Muslim fundamentalism into Afghanistan, and to ensure the Afghan government was pro-Soviet. This would eventually lead to an invasion. Let's have a look at the events leading up to the invasion. In 1978, a pro-Soviet government took power in Afghanistan, led by Hafizullah Amin. Amin and Brezhnev initially had a good relationship, but soon Amin started to face challenges from Muslim leaders, and there were attempts to overthrow him. Amin had been rumoured to be in contact with the USA for support. Brezhnev saw these rumours as a pretext to invade and install a more Soviet-friendly government. On the 24th of December 1979, Soviet troops invaded Afghanistan. They would be fighting in Afghanistan for almost 10 years. Brezhnev claimed that they were invading in support of Amin, but when Amin was assassinated on December the 27th, this excuse wore rather thin. It seems most likely that he was actually killed by Soviet special forces. As a result, Babrak Kemal, a pro-Soviet leader, was installed instead. So how did the USA react? Brezhnev felt that he was following Brezhnev doctrine, ensuring that the Soviet system survived in the face of a Muslim challenge. In this respect, he saw his reaction as comparable to the Prague Spring in 1968. The USA, though, saw it as an attempt by the USSR to spread communism abroad. Their strategy had long been to oppose this, as they had done in Korea and Vietnam, although this time they wouldn't send their army in to fight. President Carter called the invasion a threat to world peace. He withdrew from the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty No. 2. He asked Congress for additional military spending. He imposed economic sanctions on the USSR. And he introduced what he called Carter Doctrine, which he hoped to compare to Truman Doctrine, in a televised speech, promising to protect US interests in the Persian Gulf by force if necessary. In the event, much of the US involvement concerned the Mujahideen. The Muslim fighters who first fought Amin and then fought the Soviets were known as the Mujahideen. They lacked a lot of the Soviet technology and manpower that had been brought to bear against them, but they used their local knowledge of the terrain and links to the population to their full advantage in waging a devastatingly effective guerrilla war against the Soviets. The USA knew how difficult a local guerrilla force was to defeat from their own experience in Vietnam in the 1960s and 70s. In that war, it had been the communist Viet Cong getting weapons and advice from the USSR and China. The Viet Cong had long known that the USA would probably give up in the end, and they just had to tough it out long enough. While the Mujahideen had similar ideas, and they'd be similarly correct. This time the boot was very firmly on the other foot, and the USA gave billions of dollars worth of modern equipment to the Mujahideen and training in how to use it. American Stinger manpads, for example, those are man-portable air defense systems, became a massive threat to the Soviet tactic of using supply and attack helicopters in the conflict. The USSR withdrew in failure in January 1989. The war killed somewhere between 15,000 and 26,000 Soviet troops, we're not really sure how many, and perhaps as many as 1.5 million civilians. This had truly been a major conflict, and a major defeat for the Soviet Union. Let's consider the outcomes of the invasion. There's going to be quite a lot of information on this screen, so you might want to watch it full screen or pause it occasionally to make some notes. I'll leave it up to you. But let's start with the USA. The invasion gave the USA an excuse to withdraw completely from détente. In truth, it's likely that the USA was looking for an excuse anyway, and this invasion simply provided one. Carter, though, was seen as weak by some. In 1980, he lost the presidential election. Instead, Ronald Reagan won the presidency on a promise to be far harsher on the USSR. He even later referred to it as an evil empire in 1983. The USA gave military support to the Mujahideen. What about for the USSR? Well, Brezhnev expected a similar outcome to the Prague Spring, to put down an uprising quickly and then get back to business. That wasn't to be, though. Instead, the war lasted until 1989 and may have cost as many as 26,000 Soviet dead and millions of others. Brezhnev died in 1982 to be replaced by Mikhail Gorbachev, who we'll look at in a future video. But there are international dimensions to this too, particularly the Olympic boycott. The 1980 Olympic Games was held in Moscow. The USA led a boycott of the Games. 60 nations refused to take part. As the highlight of the athletics world, this was a big sacrifice for a lot of countries and athletes. In particular, the Olympic Games are meant to be neutral, and this was taking a political stance. But it was suggested by the USA that this was a protest against Soviet aggression in Afghanistan, as though therefore justified. Some athletes did travel there, but they did so as individuals, not representing their country directly. American athletes were told that attending would result in the loss of their passports. The USSR had hoped to use the Olympics to showcase communism. Instead, it showed how widely supported the USA were. The Games were seen as second-rate, with so many top athletes missing. The USSR responded with their own boycott of the 1984 Los Angeles Games in the United States, but on this occasion only 15 communist countries refused to take part. The invasion and the boycott is often seen as marking the start of a so-called Second Cold War. Our final points then. The USSR invaded Afghanistan in December 1979. Brezhnev argued that this was to secure the USSR's border against Iran and to prop up a pro-Soviet government. Hafizullah Amin was killed, despite his initial good relations with Brezhnev, and Babrak Karmal, a pro-Soviet leader, was installed. The USA used this as an excuse to withdraw from détente, which they were probably doing anyway, and the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty No. 2, or SALT II. The invasion was long and costly. Hundreds of thousands died, including as many as 26,000 Soviet troops, and the USSR left defeated in 1989. President Carter threatened the use of force to protect US interests, but not for long. Carter lost the 1980 election to Ronald Reagan, who promised to take a much harder line against the so-called evil empire of the Soviet Union. The USA provided training and weapons for the eventually victorious Afghan Mujahideen. The USA also led a boycott of the 1980 Moscow Olympics, with the USSR responding with a boycott of their own of the 1984 Los Angeles Games. This is often seen as the start of a second Cold War and a serious deterioration in superpower relations, and a dangerous new phase of the Cold War. That's the end of this video. Please do like it if it's been useful to you and subscribe to the channel for more. But for now, I'll say thanks for watching and goodbye.